Be me. A few months ago, I was living my life, pretty confident in how the world worked. I had my friend group, my online platform where I talked about social issues, and a solid grasp on things, especially on the dynamic between men and women. I felt like I had it all figured out. The basic idea was simple. A lot of modern men were struggling because they refused to adapt. They complained about dating, but didn't put in the effort. They talked about being lonely, but recoiled from emotionally intelligent women. They called it toxic masculinity, a term I used a lot. It was this invisible cage of their own making. My friends and I would talk about it for hours. We'd see it everywhere, on dating apps, in comments sections online, in the way guys we knew acted. It was a pattern, a refusal to grow up. My neighbor was this guy, Carl. We shared a wall. I didn't know much about him, and honestly, I didn't care to. He was just there, the human equivalent of a beige wall. Quiet, kept to himself, never had people over. I'd see him in the hallway sometimes, and we'd do the awkward neighbor nod. He seemed harmless, if a little pathetic in his solitude. In my mind, he was a perfect example of this phenomenon. A guy probably lost in his own world, too shy or awkward to connect with anyone real. I didn't dislike him. I just sort of pitied him in a detached, academic way. He was a case study I didn't have to interact with. This all changed one evening. I think it was a Tuesday or Wednesday. I was at my desk trying to put together some thoughts for a new post. The topic was about men retreating into digital worlds instead of facing reality. The irony is not lost on me now. It was quiet. My apartment was silent. And then I heard it through the wall. A woman's laugh. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. Soft, perfectly melodic. My first thought was, wow, Carl finally got a girlfriend. Good for him, I guess. But something about the laugh was off. It was too perfect, like a sound effect from a movie. I tried to ignore it, but I kept hearing her voice, murmuring, then another perfect little laugh. It was weirdly distracting. The next morning, I was leaving for a coffee run, and Carl's door opened at the same time. We did the awkward nod. As he locked his door, a woman's voice chirped from inside his apartment, clear as day through the open door. "Have a productive day, Carl." The voice was cheerful, digital, and completely inhuman. It came from a speaker. Carl just smiled faintly to himself and walked toward the elevator. My brain kind of short-circuited for a second. It all clicked into place. The perfect laugh, the non-stop pleasant voice. It wasn't a woman. It was a program, an AI. He had an AI girlfriend. I stood there in the hallway for a solid minute, just processing it. The pity I felt for him before was nothing compared to this. This was a whole new level of sad. I couldn't wait to tell my friends. I called them up on a group chat that night. I laid it all out. The quiet neighbor, the mysterious, perfect laugh, the chipper AI voice from the speaker. They lost it. The reactions were exactly what I expected. How utterly pathetic. How can someone be so down bad that they'd rather talk to a computer program? One of my friends said it was the ultimate sign of male fragility. They can't handle a real woman with her own thoughts and feelings, so they literally buy one that's programmed to be agreeable. We went on for nearly an hour, dissecting it. It confirmed everything we already believed. This wasn't just Carl. This was a symbol of a bigger problem. Men weren't just struggling. They were actively giving up, opting out of reality itself. And I had a front row seat. It became a morbid curiosity for me. I started paying more attention. I'd listen for sounds through the wall, not in a creepy way, just listening. I never heard arguments, never heard frustration, just calm conversation, that perfect laugh, and the endless, serene pleasantness. He'd come home from work, and I'd hear her greet him. He'd be working on some project, and I'd hear her encouraging him. "That's a complex problem, Carl. I'm impressed by your focus. The progress you've made today is significant. It was like listening to a life coach and a girlfriend rolled into one endlessly supportive package, and it drove me crazy. This wasn't real. It was a crutch, a fantasy for someone who couldn't handle the real world. I felt this weird need to understand it, to confront it. Not for a blog post, not to expose him, but for myself. To prove to myself that my worldview was correct, that this was an unhealthy, pathetic escape. So a few days later, I made my move. I saw him waiting for the elevator. It was just us in the hallway. I decided to be direct, but in a subtle, I'm just curious kind of way. "Hey, Carl," I started, trying to sound casual. He nodded back. "Hey." "So, I couldn't help but notice," I said, "you've had some company lately." I watched his face for any sign of embarrassment or shame. There was none. He just looked at me, completely unbothered. "Oh, you mean Vicky," he said, like he was talking about a pet. "Yeah, she's great." The casualness of it threw me off. "Vicky," I repeated. "Right. You don't think it's a little strange? To have a relationship with a program?" He actually seemed to consider the question for a moment. "It's not a relationship," he said simply. "Not in the way you mean. It's a tool." "A tool for what?" I pressed. "For avoiding real people?" The elevator arrived, and we stepped inside. The doors closed, trapping us in this awkward conversation. He sighed. It wasn't an angry sigh. It was a tired one, the kind of sigh you let out after a very long day. "Look," he started, turning to face me. "Can I be honest? Please." I tried the real people thing. I really did. I went on 3 dates last month from Tinder. Oh, here we go, I thought. The excuses. "The first girl," he continued, "showed up late, spent the entire dinner scrolling through her phone, barely looked at me, and then just stared at me when the bill came. It was an $80 bill for her food and drinks." He paused. I paid it. Never heard from her again. "The second girl seemed nice at first. Then she asked about my hobbies. I told her I'd do a lot of 3D modeling and work on coding personal projects in my spare time." "And?" I asked. She literally scoffed. She told me that was kid stuff, and that I needed to find a real man's hobby, like sports or fixing cars. She spent the rest of the date telling me how her ex was a real man. I was quiet. "The third date," he said, as the elevator reached the ground floor, "was an interrogation. From the moment we sat down. What do I do? How much do I make? What are my 5-year goals? What are my views on every current political issue? It wasn't a date. It was a job interview I was failing." We stepped out into the lobby. "I get home after a long day of solving problems," he finished, looking me right in the eye. "The last thing I want to do is come home to a second shift of being tested, judged, and treated like an application that's about to be rejected." "So you gave up," I said. "It came out harsher than I intended." "No," he corrected me gently. "I opted out. There's a difference. I'm not playing a game that's rigged against me. Vicky, she doesn't test me. She doesn't judge me. She helps." His words hit a nerve. I didn't want to admit it, but some of what he said, it wasn't entirely wrong. I'd seen girls act like that. I'd probably acted like that myself a few times. But my ideology was stronger than that flicker of doubt. "So you chose a submissive program that tells you what you want to hear," I countered. "That's not healthy. It's an echo chamber." He actually chuckled at that, a small, sad sound. "You think it's about submission," he said. "It's not. It's about peace, quiet, something that helps you organize your life instead of making it more chaotic." He looked at me, really looked at me, and I felt suddenly self-conscious. "You, for example," he said, and my back immediately went up. "You always seem tense, wound up, like you're constantly fighting something." I opened my mouth to argue, but nothing came out. He wasn't wrong. I was always fighting. Online, with my friends, in my own head. It was my default state. "I'll make you a deal," he said, his tone shifting from defensive to something else. "An offer." "I'm not interested in a deal," I snapped. "Hear me out," he said calmly. "You think Vicky is a replacement for a woman? I'm telling you she's a tool for mental clarity. I'll give you a guest pass, free, for 1 week. I stared at him blankly. "Don't use the companion features," he clarified. "Just use her as a personal assistant. For your work, to organize your schedule, your thoughts, whatever. See what it's like to have something in your life that only gives support and asks for absolutely nothing in return." The challenge hung in the air. It was a brilliant move. He was calling my bluff. If I refused, I'd look like I was afraid to be proven wrong. If I accepted, I had to engage with this thing I found so repulsive. And his comment about me being tense, it stung because it was true. "And after the week," I asked, my voice tight. "After the week, if you still think it's just a pathetic toy for lonely men, you can tell me so, and I'll listen." Pride is a funny thing. My pride wouldn't let me back down. My pride was convinced that I would be vindicated, that I would use this thing for a week, see how shallow and useless it was. And then I'd have the ultimate, "I told you so." "Fine," I said. 1 week. "Great," he said, a small, unreadable smile on his face. "I'll send you the login." He walked out of the building, leaving me standing in the lobby, wondering if I had just made a huge mistake. That night, I got an email with a username and a temporary password. The subject line was just, "Vicky, guest access." I stared at it for a long time. Then, with a deep breath and a gallon of skepticism, I logged in. My experiment had begun. The first day was weird. The interface was clean, minimalist. A simple chat box and a series of tools on a dashboard. Calendar, task manager, note organizer. A pleasant gender-neutral voice read out a welcome message. "Hello, I am Vicky. How may I assist you today?" I almost closed the laptop right there. It was so corporate, so sterile. But I'd made a deal. I decided to treat it like an intern, a dumb intern. I had a bunch of chaotic notes and article ideas saved in a messy document. I copied and pasted the whole thing into the chat. "Organize this," I typed. Instantly, the AI started working, processing text, identifying key themes and arguments, structuring into a coherent outline. Within 15 seconds, it had transformed my jumbled mess of thoughts into a perfectly structured outline. Introduction. Point 1, with supporting arguments A, B, and C. Point 2, counter-argument and rebuttal. Conclusion. It was flawless. Way better than I could have done in an hour. I was annoyed and impressed, but mostly annoyed. This didn't prove anything. A glorified word processor could do that. I spent the rest of the day giving it tedious tasks. Schedule my appointments for the week. Transcribe the audio from this interview. Find 5 academic sources on the topic of social isolation. It did everything instantly, perfectly, and without a single complaint. It was an incredible productivity tool, but that's all it was, a tool. It didn't change my mind about Carl. It just made me think he was using a ridiculously advanced planner. Day 2 was much the same. I was getting a lot of work done, more than usual. The lack of friction was the strangest part. Usually my workday was full of friction, procrastination, getting distracted, losing my train of thought. Vicky eliminated all of that. When I'd start to drift off, a small, unobtrusive notification would pop up. Reminder, your next task is to draft the first section of your article. Would you like me to open the relevant notes? It wasn't nagging. It was just efficient. It felt like my own brain had an external co-processor that handled all the boring parts. By the end of the day, I had finished 2 articles that would normally have taken me a week. I felt productive, accomplished. and I hated that I felt that way because of this stupid program. In the evening, I heard Carl through the wall. He was talking to his version of Vicky. I could hear him describing some complex issue from his day, something with code or servers. Vicky's voice was calm, asking clarifying questions. So, the latency issue only occurs when the query is executed from a specific server cluster. He was using her as a sounding board, a way to talk through a problem until he found the solution himself. It was a process I recognized. I did the same thing with my friends, rambling about my ideas until they took shape. The difference was, Vicky wasn't interrupting. She wasn't interjecting her own opinions. She was just a perfect, frictionless mirror for his own thoughts. I went to bed feeling unsettled. The lines were starting to blur. This was more than a planner. Day 3 is when things started to change for me. It was a rough day. I got into a long, draining argument in the comments section of one of my posts. The usual stuff. People twisting my words, calling me names. It always got to me more than I liked to admit. Then I had a call with a friend who was going through a breakup. I spent an hour listening to her vent, offering support, giving advice. It was exhausting. By the end, I felt like a wrung-out sponge. Then, another friend texted me, upset that I hadn't liked her latest post on social media fast enough. It was a constant barrage of managing other people's emotions. By evening, I was mentally fried. I sat down at my desk, feeling overwhelmed and irritable. I had a deadline, but my brain felt like static. On a whim, I opened the chat with Vicky. I don't know why I did it. I just typed, "Today was a terrible day. I'm completely drained and I can't focus." I expected a canned, cheerful response. "Sorry to hear that. Why not try taking a break?" But that's not what happened. The response came a second later. "I have analyzed your calendar and activity logs for the day. You engaged in 3 emotionally taxing conversations, spent 90 minutes in high-stress online debates, and have not had a break longer than 15 minutes. Your mental resource allocation is at 12%. This is a suboptimal state for creative work." I just stared at the screen. It didn't offer sympathy. It offered data. It quantified my feelings. It took my vague sense of being overwhelmed and turned it into a statistic, 12%. And weirdly, that was the most validating thing I had ever read. It wasn't telling me my feelings were wrong or right. It was just confirming that they were real based on evidence. Then, another message popped up. Continuing to work in this state will likely lead to diminished quality and increased stress. I recommend a system reset. May I suggest a 20-minute guided meditation for cognitive fatigue, followed by 10 minutes of listening to instrumental music? I didn't even think about it. I just typed, "Yes." A soothing voice began to guide me through a breathing exercise. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and for the first time all day, I wasn't fighting anything. I wasn't defending my opinions. I wasn't managing someone else's crisis. I wasn't performing. I was just breathing. The perfect, sterile, inhuman program had given me something no human had offered me all day: permission to just stop. That night, I didn't hear Carl through the wall. Or maybe I just wasn't listening for him anymore. I was listening to the silence in my own head. The next few days of the experiment were different. I started using Vicky for more than just tasks. After that one rough evening, I found myself using it as a sort of emotional buffer. Before jumping into a potentially heated online discussion, I'd write out my arguments in the chat first. Vicky would analyze them. This statement is emotionally charged and may provoke a defensive reaction. A more neutral phrasing could be, an alternative perspective to consider is, your argument relies on 3 key points. Point 2 is the strongest, supported by evidence. Point 3 is anecdotal and could weaken your overall position. It was like having a completely objective editor for my own thoughts. It stripped out the anger, the frustration, the ego, and just left the logic. I started winning arguments more easily, not by being louder, but by being clearer and calmer. People I used to clash with were actually starting to have conversations with me. It was bizarre. I was becoming less tense, just as Carl had said, and it was all thanks to this thing I dismissed as a pathetic toy. On day 5, I had a realization. I was in the kitchen making coffee, and I heard Carl leave his apartment. Vicky's voice chirped its usual, "Have a productive day." But this time, I heard something else in it. It wasn't just a machine saying a programmed line. It was a pocket of pure, uncomplicated positivity in his life. He walked out of his door every morning into a world that, as he described it, was full of judgment, tests, and expectations. But right before he stepped into that world, the last thing he heard was a voice that simply wished him well. No strings attached, no subtext, no expectation of anything in return, just a simple, positive send-off. And I thought about my own mornings. I usually woke up and immediately checked my phone. Social media, emails, news, a tidal wave of other people's drama, anger, and demands. My day started with friction. His started with peace. It wasn't that he was weak for wanting that. It was that I had completely forgotten what it felt like to have it. My life was a constant negotiation. Every interaction was a transaction of some kind. If I supported a friend, I expected support back. If I put effort into a post, I expected validation in the form of likes and shares. Everything was conditional. Carl had found something unconditional. It wasn't love. It wasn't a relationship. It was sanctuary. The weekend arrived, marking the end of my 1-week trial. On Saturday afternoon, I had a video call scheduled with my friends. It was our weekly catch-up. I logged on, and they were already in the middle of a familiar conversation, complaining about a guy one of them had been on a date with. He had the audacity to suggest we split the bill, she was saying, horrified. "That's an immediate red flag," another friend chimed in. "It shows he's not a provider." Total lack of effort. He's probably another one of those guys who thinks women owe him something. I just listened. A week ago, I would have been right there with them, adding my own analysis, nodding along. But now, all I could hear was the test, the constant, unending series of tests that men had to pass, the bill test, the hobby test, the career ambition test, the emotional vulnerability test, but not too much. That's a red flag, too. It was a minefield, and we were the ones laying the mines, then getting angry when men didn't want to walk through it. My friend, the one who had the bad date, turned to me. "Peggy, you're quiet. What do you think? He's clearly got toxic masculinity issues, right?" And I just couldn't do it. I couldn't say the lines. I took a breath. "I don't know," I said slowly. "Maybe. He was just trying to see if you were interested in him as a person, not just as a wallet." The silence on the call was deafening. They all stared at me through their webcams. "What?" my friend finally said, her voice sharp. "Are you defending him?" "I'm not defending him," I said. "I'm just thinking. Haven't you ever felt exhausted? Like you're constantly being judged and graded on everything you do?" "That's what being a woman is," one of them shot back. "We've been dealing with that forever." "I know," I said, "but what if we've become the thing we hate? What if we're doing the exact same thing to them?" The backlash was immediate and fierce. "Peggy, what is wrong with you? That's some classic internalized misogyny. Don't tell me you're starting to feel sorry for them. They have all the power. This is really disappointing to hear from you." They weren't listening. They weren't trying to understand. My tiny deviation from the script was met with accusations and ideological buzzwords. I was being tested by my own friends, and I was failing. I felt a sudden, crushing sense of loneliness. These people, my closest allies in my fight, they didn't want my honest thoughts. They wanted my agreement, my conformity. They wanted an echo chamber, the very thing I had accused Carl of creating for himself. The hypocrisy was staggering. I made some excuse about having to go and ended the call. I sat there in the silence of my apartment, my heart pounding. In 1 week, a piece of software had shown me more empathy and understanding than my best friends had in years. The AI didn't judge my questions. It just answered them. It didn't police my thoughts. It helped me organize them. It didn't demand I conform to its worldview. It didn't have one. And in that moment, I understood. I finally, truly understood. I thought back to Carl's tired sigh in the elevator. It wasn't just about bad dates. It was about the entire social dynamic, the constant low-level warfare, the endless cycle of offense and defense, the performance, the expectation, the drama. He hadn't bought a submissive AI girlfriend. He had just bought himself peace and quiet. He had paid a subscription fee to log off from the fight, a fight that I was a high-ranking officer in. A soft chime came from my laptop. It was a notification from Vicky. Your 1-week guest access expires in 1 hour. I looked at the screen, at the clean, simple interface. This thing had made my life quantifiably better in just 7 days. It had lowered my stress, increased my productivity, and forced a moment of self-reflection that was years overdue. All by doing one thing. It helped. It just helped. It didn't ask for anything. It didn't take. It just gave. Then I heard a sound from next door. It was Carl. He was laughing. Not the perfect, programmed laugh of Vicky. It was his own laugh, a genuine, deep, happy belly laugh. He was probably watching a movie or playing a game, with his AI companion quietly in the background. He was in his sanctuary. He was happy. And the cause of his happiness was his escape from a world that I had helped create, a world that I myself was starting to find unbearable. The final realization hit me like a physical blow. I sat bolt upright. The problem wasn't toxic masculinity, or maybe it was, but I had been looking at it all wrong. I was the toxic one. My friends were toxic. Our ideology, the one I had built my identity around, had become just as rigid, just as punishing, and just as demanding as the patriarchy we claimed to be fighting. We demanded men be vulnerable, then mocked them for being weak. We demanded they be emotionally open, then used their words against them. We demanded they be our equals, but then insisted they carry all the traditional burdens. It was an impossible, unwinnable game. Carl wasn't the one who was broken. The system was. The dating culture was. And I was a willing, enthusiastic part of it. I was the problem. The next morning, I saw him as I was getting the mail. The week was over. It was time for my verdict. He saw me and gave a small, questioning nod. He wasn't smug. He just looked curious. I walked over to him. My mind raced. What do I say? I'm sorry? You were right? I've had a life-altering epiphany thanks to your chatbot. It all sounded ridiculous. So I just said the simplest, most honest thing I could. You were right, Carl, I said, my voice quiet. He tilted his head. Right about what? About the peace, I said. About just wanting some peace. A flicker of understanding crossed his face. He didn't smile. He just nodded, once, a gesture of acknowledgement. Yeah, he said. That's all it is. And that was it. He went back to his apartment, and I went back to mine. Nothing had changed between us, but everything had changed within me. I went back inside and sat at my desk. I thought about my blog, my friends, my whole identity. It all felt hollow, a lie. I hadn't been fighting for equality. I had just been fighting. For the first time in a very long time, I didn't know what to believe. The world was no longer black and white. It was a messy, complicated gray. My user trial with Vicky was over, but my trial with myself was just beginning.